Uh,
Right.
okay, let's try with sub. If you turn it on, let's see how big it is.
Here.
How much it would take up, and so far it's not doing anything.
Turn it up. You
Turn it on. I want to see.
share. You're on.
Okay, now I am on. Yeah. Okay, so if I take this and I put it, this is as far up as it'll go. Is
That will go away.
But this is as far up as it'll go, huh?
That is correct.
Well, that sucks.
Kenya was saying that a lot of people in the back can't see because a lot of times I have my closed.
Yeah, I'm thinking I'm just going to leave it up in this corner. All right.
He says you've got a lot of active slides, and he didn't think it'd be good to have it. Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Come on in, grab a seat. Welcome. And if you are in the room and have a cell phone, if you can silence it, it'll be greatly appreciated. If you are on Zoom, you are muted. Please stay muted. You can ask questions at the end of the presentation, and I'll monitor in the chat. Henry Logan is here, and she's got an announcement to make.
Hi, my name is Henry Logan, and I have the privilege of being the chair of the ILR board. This is the last in our session of Adventures in Living, and I wanted to take the opportunity to thank you for your participation in this, and also to thank the facilitators. I want to recognize Dick Martin, Deborah Dean, Jane Wood, where'd you go? And Diane Hain. And I'd also like to have you save the date for our fall kickoff. And I have little reminder cards for you. It's September 21st, which is a Sunday at 2 o'clock. We'll convene here in the room and we'll talk about some extraordinary offerings for this fall. Then we'll adjourn and have a little wine and cheese, and hopefully we'll have a chance to talk to some of the facilitators. September 21st, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I think you're going to be amazed at, again, what the curriculum committee and the facilitators have been able to pull together. So with that, I'm going to just turn it back over to Diane and say thank you again for your participation, and to you wonderful folks for putting it together, and of course, our presenters.
Thank you, Henry. Henry just took half of my speech away. I was going to thank the facilitators, but that's okay. I can thank them again. First, I'd like to thank all of you for coming these last 6 weeks and participating in Adventures in Living. And I would like to thank the facilitators and Pam especially, who keeps us all together here and make sure it all works. It's great that you're here in the Oak Room. I think it's wonderful for us to get together here. But Zoom is also terrific. I mean, we've had Phyllis with us this year from Colorado. We've had Neil with us from Michigan. And I don't know if you knew it, but I was in Santa Fe, New Mexico on Zoom last week, watching you all. Well, I didn't see you really, but I saw Neil and I saw Pam. So it's really wonderful to be able to do all of this. I would like to thank the facilitators, especially Dick Martin, who's sitting right over here, who, yeah, a round of applause would be great for all the facilitators. And Debbie Dean, who's up at the podium, who does the introductions every week. And Jane Wood, who runs around, and she's back now. I saw her disappearing out the door when we were about to introduce her. Anyway, thank you all for coming. Thank you, facilitators. Thank you in advance for any of you who would like to do an adventure in living. I know many of you in the room here have done one, but we always need new people. And when you're at your floor parties or you're at dinner and you think, oh, that person would be interesting to do an adventure in living, please let us know and let them know that we would love to get in touch with them. No pressure. Also, we would like to have some other people join us as facilitators. We've all been at it a long time. I think Dick has been at it for almost the entire 20 years of Oak Hammock. I've been at it for about 7, although I've been here longer. I escaped for a few years. But let us know. Get in touch with me or with any one of us, excuse me, or with Henry, who is our big boss, as it were. Okay, so now today we have a special treat. We have Mary Christman here, And her husband's right in the front here to try to keep her under control, and Don's trying to keep him under control. So anyway, so let me turn it over to Debbie now, and she will introduce Mary, and we'll get going. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome to our final Adventures in Living presentation for this summer of 2025. Last but not least, we have Mary Christman and her semi-directed random walk. Well, that sounds interesting right there. Many of us are familiar with Mary due to her active involvement in Oak-Hammock affairs, her chairing of the Active Lifestyle Committee, her role as an icon helper, and in the restaurant Ramblers. She's a spark plug. She's also been a UF Performing Arts Center usher and an AARP tax aide. Mary and her husband, Bob Palmer, who's there beside Don, moved to Oak-Hammock in May of 2024. Mary has a doctorate in marine science and statistics. Mary and Bob met in the Mid-Atlantic region and have been married for over 45 years. They moved to Gainesville 21 years ago for Mary's move to UF. They later moved to Oak-Hammock and are thoroughly enjoying the new community they've become part of. Here is Mary's life in 35 minutes. And if this were a dating app, she says she enjoys hiking, traveling, arts and crafts, and the seashore. So take it away, Mary.
Doesn't this sometimes feel like we are on a dating app? Did I hear Diane say that many people in here have already given talks? So you know this special torture that she's putting us through? I am going to try and tell you about 70 some odd years of my life in the next 35 minutes. I think I have like 34 slides. And no, it's not all mathy stuff. I was trying to think about how to describe my life quickly. And it was either highlights, which would have been all over the place, or sort of this slightly more organized approach. So I hope you know a little bit more about me in the end, and feel free to complain if you don't like what I said. So one of the things is that when Diane asked me to do this, the very first question I had was, oh, I need to be closer to the mic. Beep, beep, beep. One of the very first questions I asked myself was, how the heck did I get to this point in my life? And I don't mean standing here with all these lovely women at a quilt show over in Daytona. I mean, how did I wind up at this point in my life with this history? I mean, here I am. By the way, I'm only a year and a half older than this one. But somehow I wound up being the beanstalk and he wound up being the shortest kid in the house. So this is just some of us, as you'll see in a minute. But I want to talk a little bit about what do I mean by a semi-directed random walk? Well, random walks are, at each point in time, the next step is chosen in a random direction and a random length. And as you can see in this picture here, here's a bunch of particles that are off on random walks. So, you know, sometimes this is what your life feels like, right? But that's just a random walk. What does it mean to say that it's a semi-directed random walk? How do I get out of this? Pam, how do I get back? Oh, wait, this is easy enough. There. So these are more or less time steps. And as you can see, somewhere along the line, these three life histories sort of diverge. By the way, this is ant movement, but, you know, 3 ants got carried away. So here's like 3 different ones. How does this happen? Well, there's a technique called a semi-directed random walk where this is a random walk that's a bit like a Sisyphean torture, where you're rolling along in your random walk and something resets you back to the baseline. And you roll along in your random walk and you get reset in the baseline. That's not how my life yet went. I did not get reset into baselines, but it does get interrupted. These are these external pivot points that change the trajectory of my life. And so as an example, this is sort of a summary of all the pivot points and what I think of as the pivot points in my life. So we're going to go through most of these, and I'll tell you about how they changed my trajectory. And I often wonder, where would I be now if this hadn't happened, or if this hadn't happened? So you get to go along on this journey with me. Let me give you a little background. I was born in Philadelphia. I'm number 2 of 9. Here's my sister, Peggy Ann. By the way, her real name's Elizabeth. I have no idea how they came to call her Peggy Ann, but she's Peggy Ann, and then here I am, number 2. That's Mom. That's my dad over here. Here's Mom again. Here's my other sisters. Here's my brother's kid. So there's me, there's Kathleen, there's Dory, there's Patricia, there's Eileen, there's Johnny, there's Chazzy. Oh, poor Chazzy. How do I, back. Chazzy, Gregory, my dad again, Bob, of course. So, it was a rather crowded household. These are not big houses. I went to Catholic schools because in Philadelphia at the time, I believe they were the last diocese in the country not to charge tuition. So my parents felt that if they sent me to public school, I would never learn anything because I was too spacey to go my own way. And I will say, by my senior year of high school, I had played hooky on at least 22 days. I almost didn't graduate because they hollered at me. I got hollered at and told that if I did it again, I wouldn't graduate. Yet I graduated in the top 10% of my class in spite of that. Don't know how. Dad was a machinist. Mom was a stay-at-home parent. So here I am growing up in a very large family, don't have a lot of money. Neither of my parents even got a high school degree. So, I'm approaching high school graduation and I need to decide what I'm going to do. So this is sort of the first pivot point. I could stay at home in the bedroom with 3 other sisters and get a job and sort of feel like I hadn't grown up. Or I could move out. But if you recall, back in the day, women had a hard time getting credit. As a consequence, I had no money, so how was I going to move out and live on my own? And going to a Catholic school, the high school counselor recommended when I went to see her about my life choices, I could be a nurse, a mother, a nun, or a teacher. So one of my options was the nunnery. Or I had a high school boyfriend. I was sort of serious with him at the time. I don't know who proposed it, but one of us decided we should get married. And of course, to me, that was my freedom. Boom, off I could go. So guess what I did? I got married. I was 17 and a half. This was not odd in my family. My mother was 17 when they got married. My grandparents were in their teens when they got married. So this was not an unusual thing. But I got married, and of course, we set up household. So I got me a job, worked for Bell Telephone in Philadelphia as a draftsman. Thinking back on it now, all the engineers were men, all the draftswomen, all the draftspeople were women. But we did some fun stuff. It was a fun job for a while. I thought I came from a large family. I sat next to a woman who was number 10 of 16. It turns out her mother had 5 natural sets of twins. So she wasn't pregnant 16 times, but she had a lot of kids. So I didn't feel out of place at all. But, I was working for Bell Telephone as a draftsman, and it was interesting for a while. But I really did want to go to college. Since my parents hadn't even finished high school, I didn't know anything about how one goes about doing this. But when I was in high school, I did apply to 3 universities, Temple, University of Pennsylvania, and because they were both in Philly. And because of the name, I have no idea what possessed me to do this. The Indiana University of Pennsylvania, which was up in the northwest part of the state. And for some reason, that just fascinated me that they could have 2 state names in their university name. So I applied there, and I got into all 3, but of course, I had no way of going to college at that point. But I was able, after a year of being at Bell Telephone, to go part-time and go to Temple. So I did go to Temple for a year, didn't declare a major or anything. It was like being in high school again, though. It was just a very large high school. So what happened was, is at this point, I had been working and going to school. My husband at the time, John, was a full-time student at Penn and did have a scholarship through his parents. Um, the turns out that they knew how to get money, but I didn't. And he told me that if you were a full-time employee at the university, you could take up to 8 free courses a year. So guess what I did? I got a job at the university, and my job was in, unfortunately, I can't see the name of it. It's the Institute for Environmental Medicine. You know, one of the downsides of going back through your life is you find out a lot of things don't exist anymore. This is one of them. Chris Lambertson was famous for scuba research back in the day, and this was a hyperbaric research lab. So the effects of pressure on different things. And so while I was there, I was a lab technician in different kinds of experiments, everything from college students to rats to dogs to cats. I think those are the only critters I worked on. They also put me in a prescient sort of way with the biometrician. So I wound up, do you see this lovely piece of equipment right here? This is the Marchant programmable calculator. This is before, TI 200s or whatever. And I would sit and program this according to her directions and sit there and it would go chunka, 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 chunka. And then it would spit out a number at the end. You'd write it down. Then you'd put in the next line of program and it would chunk, chunk, chunk. And you sort of went through it this way. We did have a computer, but in order to use it, you had to know what's the binary language? BASIC, where you flip switches in order, and each line of code was flipped switches. I didn't do that, somebody else did. The other thing is, because I had had a little bit of background drafting, I got drafted to do some scientific illustration. This is not mine, this is just an example of the sort of graphics that I was doing. So I was doing this while I was also going to school before work, at lunch, or at night, or on the weekends when they offered weekend courses. And I did this for several years. But while I was there, other people started coming to me, especially in the College of Medicine, to do some drawings. And so I wound up starting a business as a scientific illustrator. So one guy actually dissected a rat for me so I could draw it. Another one dissected a squid so I could draw the giant axon that is in this. This is not a giant squid. This is a giant axon in the squid. So this is an interesting little aside. At the time, I thought I was rich. I was charging $10 an hour, which, in those days was a lot of money. Well, guess what? Professors and scientists are just as bad as their students. They wait till less than a week. This was back in the day where they still had to photograph these things into slides. So you take your little slide, what is that thing called? Carousel, with you to your talk. So if they were less than a week away, I charged them $10 an hour. If they were less than 48 hours away, I charged them $30 an hour. It didn't stop them. I had a colorblind scientist show up at my apartment off campus at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night. He called me. I was expecting him on 11 o'clock on a Saturday night to draw a color graphic showing differences between three treatments, even though he couldn't see the color. So I had to design it in such a way that he would know which line was which. Dashes and dots were the way to go. And he came and picked it up the next morning. So, I mean, it's typical. It was very typical of the time. But there got to be a point where I couldn't take courses at odd hours anymore. I was an undergraduate biology major, and I did have to, at some point, go full time. Well, I had been at the university long enough that I found out about Pell Grants. I found out about student loans. And so for my last year of college, that's exactly what I did. I got a Pell Grant to cover the tuition and fees, and I got a student loan to cover living, basically. So this, I don't know if you can see it, was a really big change in my life. I was an undergraduate biology major with an interest at the time in medicine. But oh my God, pre-med students are cutthroat. They will break into your drawer in your lab and steal your results of your chemistry experiments and things like that, so you couldn't write them up. I didn't want anything to do with that. And I would always been fascinated by creatures that were very different than us. So I went into invertebrate zoo. And my undergraduate advisor was the good Dr. Hans Georg Borai, who bought himself a house on Swans Island, right here, down in this area. He convinced the university to buy some buildings here by the quarry so that he could start a lab. And then he started this 6-week field course in marine sciences. It was probably one of the most eye-opening courses I ever took. So I got to go to Maine for 6 weeks. We lived in houses somewhere around here. There were 5 boys, 5 girls. So we hung out there. We went clamming. We went fishing. We went 24-hour experiments. I got to see what's it called? Luminescence, the bioluminescence at night. We each had to do an experiment, and my experiment was all the way over here in Toothacre Cove. I was interested in what are known as myofauna. These critters here, they live in the interstices of sand. So they're that small that they live over there. So there's things like tardigrades and polychaetes and all sorts of other stuff like that. So I didn't have a car. In fact, I still hadn't even learned how to drive at this point in my life. In order to get from the lab over to my site, there was one student who had a car, and he very kindly would drop me off somewhere over here, and I'd hike over to my site. Well, that got to be a little old. You know, I was really pushing to ask him to drive me every time I wanted to go do my research. So me, thinking, oh yeah, sure, I can do anything, decided I'd take a rowboat with a little outboard motor. That's what this little picture is. So I started here from the lab, went around this point here, the lighthouse point, went over to my research site. Everything went well. I did an overnight study. I'm putt-putting my way back the next day, and as you might have guessed, the engine died. Well, do I know anything about engines? No. So I'm frantically rowing. That's when I found out that my left arm isn't near as strong as my right. I zigzagged my way. Well, I wasn't about to go around the point. So I wound up beaching over here and walking all the way back and found somebody to come help me get the boat and start the engine and putt-putt our way back over here. So in addition to getting my honors thesis by working on these myofauna, I also got the experience of having things like the fucus kelp waving right under the boat, and I'm looking and I'm going, what the heck is that? And then suddenly this head pops up and it looks like a skull, and it turned out to be a seal, but because they're very newsy. So that was certainly an interesting day, let's say. But this did set me off onto a whole new trajectory. I mean, had I not taken this course, I expect I probably would just have gotten another job at Penn and stayed there and worked as a lab tech. But what that did was it motivated me to want to go to graduate school. So off I went to the University of Delaware and the College of Marine Studies. This is the Lewis campus, so it's down by the ferry over to New Jersey, which is where my family lived at this point, so I could go visit them anytime I wanted. I did get a scholarship and a research assistantship to go there. At this point, I had married John to get out of the house. I'm not sure I was really that serious about him. You know, we were sort of drifting apart. So I was on my own. It was the first time I got a chance to live on my own outside of John in Philadelphia. And I wound up getting a master's in marine science after 2 years. Here's the critter I worked on. This is the larvae. It's this small little creature that floats in the water column. And has no control over where it goes except for vertical movement. It responds to it's phototactic. It responds to light changing. And these crabs are found all the way offshore in this continent, what's called the continental slope. So I got to do some research out at sea, which was that's when I found out I get seasick. So, those first couple of days on the boat, you're like, because Dramamine just put you to sleep. You didn't want to do that because we were on 6-hour watches, hot bunking, which meant that if you were working, somebody was sleeping in your bunk, and you did so 6 hours. That's twice a day. You're not in your bunk, and the other 6 you're eating, showering, sleeping. It was an interesting experience, but nonetheless, I enjoyed it a lot. But college the graduate school was very important to me. This is where I met the love of my life, Bob Palmer. This is his then girlfriend, Betsy, who got a little aggravated with me later on. This is me. We met we actually met before this, but this is where I sort of realized what he was like. He was tall, dark, handsome, smarter than hell, smart alecky, self-confident, all things that are attractive to young women, so except that here he's not so tall, dark, and handsome. He's pretending to be Renee Richards. Yeah, that's who we came. I was a flapper. So this was a rather important point in my life. And he threw over her. I got rid of Don. We did good. So towards the end, we both got our degrees around the same time. I think mine was May and his was August. But he got his PhD and couldn't decide quite whether he wanted to go into academia or not. And he was invited, he got a congressional fellowship. At that time, the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, had a setup where they wanted scientists, especially recent scientists or ones on sabbatical, to come and work on the Hill for a year in a congressional office or committee as a bridge between the scientific community and the sociologic politic community. Bob could tell you a lot better than me. But I had, in the meantime, been offered a PhD position at the University of Rhode Island, but Bob invited me to go to DC. So do I follow him? Which, feminism, you don't want to be following the guy around. But at the same time, when I went to URI to interview, I found out that most of the students took 7 to 8 years after their master's to get their PhD. Well, I was done with school at that point, temporarily at least. So I decided, what the heck, I would go to DC with him. I got a job at NOAA, not the most exciting job. It was data management that turned into computer systems analysis later on. He, on the other hand, after a year, was invited to a full-time position with the Congressional Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, where he stayed for the next 26, 27 years. So here he is, right here. This is him. This is the congressional class that year. And this is him. You like his beard? All right, go away already. Why is this not going away? Probably because I keep hitting it. But that's Bob. He was getting a little hirsute at that point. This is the Hill, of course. But while we were in DC, we got married, of course. This is us. The wedding was hysterical, by the way. We had a non-denominational minister in what I called an ice cream suit. He was in a full white suit with gold jewelry dangling down around his neck. And he married us in my parents' backyard, which is where we had the reception. This is in Wildwood Crest, New Jersey. We bought 1 or 2 bushels of steamed crabs. My brother Gregory became the grill master and grilled hamburgers, hot dogs, and chicken for people who didn't want to sit there and pick crab. We spent months before the wedding trying every cheap champagne we could find, wound up with a $4 bottle of champagne. We were very proud of ourselves, very drunk at that point, but very proud. I made my dress. This is Bob and his brother, who was his best man. We had a wonderful time. It was a great weekend. We went up on the boardwalk. This is Wildwood. We went up on the boardwalk and played putt-putt in our dress-up clothes. So, it was just one of those weekends where the next morning we all got up. Everybody who stayed over at the hotel got up, and we all went down to the beach and went swimming. This is September in southern New Jersey. It's the perfect time of year to be at the beach. And of course, within a year, we bought ourselves our first little house, which we were very proud of. We had a veggie garden, I decorated, painted, all that stuff. What was important, though, during this time, from my perspective, from my trajectory in my life, was that there was a fellow, Bob Smythe. And if you hear me call my Bob by his last name, Palmer, the reason is there were so many Bobs that we just wound up calling everybody by their last name. It was easier. But Bob Smythe also stayed in D.C. after his year. He was a statistician from Oregon, or was he in Seattle at that time? It was one or the other. And he worked for the Navy for a while, but he wound up becoming the chair of the Department of Statistics at GW. And at this point, I really was bored with my job. I was a computer systems analyst, designing interfaces of the computer with individuals who had to do data entry. Not what I wanted to do. So Bob said, "Oh, we're starting a program in statistical computing. You want to do that?" I said, "Oh, that might be interesting. I could combine computer knowledge, statistics. I always loved math. Did not major in it as an undergraduate because the person I had for calculus didn't speak English, refused to turn around from the board, and just wrote equations for an hour. Well, that was not going to invite me to be a math major. She was an international graduate student, and I think she was terrified of the undergrads. But this was an opportunity for me to sort of combine my interest in mathematics and my biology and my experience in computing. So what the heck? Yeah, sure, let me go do that. So I had to take all sorts of math and computer science classes because I'd learned everything on the fly. There was a point where I was taking 6 classes, 4 at Nova and 2 at GW, in order to get my prereqs out of the road, because as an undergraduate biology major, you don't have 4 semesters of calculus typically, and you certainly don't have Fortran and Pascal or COBOL or any of those. So managed to survive those, and there it is, and got a scholarship and a teaching assistantship at GW, and after 5 years, 4.5, 5 years, got my PhD. Here's Bob Smythe and his wife, Pat. They are still lifelong friends with us. My mom, my dad. Here's my advisor, Tappan Nayak. I think he was a little scared of me, mainly because I was taller than him. But here's me getting my PhD. Tappan was actually an absolutely wonderful advisor. He terrified all the Indian students because I think they had sort of different expectations, but he and I got along really well. So I was very happy to have Tappan. This is, this sounds very mathy, but in fact, the whole point of this particular research for my PhD is, imagine that you're doing some sort of sampling and you're trying to figure out how many different species there are in this environment when all you can do is see a partial picture of it. You know how many of each species that you did see, and the idea was, could you use that information to guess how many were still not there, that were missing in your list? And so it sounds very stochastic processes, but in fact, it had an application, which is what drove me to do this research. So having gotten my PhD, off I went to my first job. I had to stay in DC because Bob was with Congress, and Congress doesn't live anywhere else but DC. So I got a job at American University. It's a very nice little school, 5,000 undergrads. They always joke that American was their second choice, but they were very smart, very good students. No class was bigger than 20. I did have to teach 4 undergraduate classes a year. Our graduate program was so small that any graduate class never met the minimum requirement, so we would teach them as what they called overloads. So that was difficult to teach that many classes and do research and collaborate with other people. But being an American introduced me to a rascal, I guess, David Culver, a cave biologist who, I mean, it was fascinating. This is the sort of critters he looked at, isopods and copepods and not so much polychaetes, but he didn't work with vertebrates. He worked with inverts, which was, you know, what I had done as an undergrad. So we sort of clicked very quickly. Now, David loved to crawl in caves and get wet and muddy and all that sort of stuff, the exact opposite of me. I don't like confined spaces. I don't like being smushed together with a bunch of people. But he did introduce me to a wonderful community of cave biologists. And in fact, my very first trip to Europe for a conference was for the symposium on subterranean biology that was held in Mouly, France, which is 100 kilometers south of Toulouse in the Pyrenees. That was chosen for several reasons. This is the mid to late 90s. So it's after Yugoslavia had disintegrated and the Serbs and the Croats had been fighting and all that. And so these were very poor countries, but there's huge amounts of caves there and very strong cave biology research all across northern Italy into the Adriatic area and France and Spain. So he chose to have this symposium there in order to invite the researchers who couldn't afford to go elsewhere. And he invited me to come and give a talk. I was literally the only non-cave biologist, literally. So it's a tiny town. Today it's got about 750 people. At the time it had maybe 1,200. It's in a gorgeous setting. One of the reasons it was chosen was because they had a subterranean laboratory there where they were studying this salamander. What was interesting about this, I had an interesting experience with this trip. Flew into Toulouse, and of course, I don't drive. Well, I drove at this point, but 2 faculty from the University of Toulouse picked me up, a husband and wife, who proceeded to berate me for not speaking French. I had to sit in the back of a car for 100 kilometers with 2 people who basically decided to talk to me in French, even though they spoke English. So I get down there. We wind up at this teeny tiny little hotel where I wind up in a cottage that was broken into 2 bedrooms with, you know, those vertical walls that go to about 7 feet in offices? That was our 2 bedrooms separation. It was an interesting week. So there's 35 to 40 cave biologists stuffed into a room that fits maybe 25. So already I'm like, then they put all the curtains down. These are cave biologists. They love being in small confined spaces. I'm sitting there dying for a week because I'm in this tiny hot room with a bunch of people I don't know. Wonderful talks, I will say. At least I was distracted. Every day at lunchtime, they took us out to a hall where the Women's Club put together lunch for us. Well, it was the height of mad cow disease, hysteria. So as a consequence, this is what we ate every day at lunchtime: cheese and duck. And of course, white wine. Can't have lunch without white wine. So by the time we all get back, about half of us are falling asleep in this dark, hot, tight little room. But it was certainly an interesting experience, and I wound up collaborating with several different people over the years from this symposium, and in fact had a postdoc from Slovenia come and visit us here in Gainesville 2 times. She had a L'Oreal scholarship, I believe. But the downside of that was that since I had to do all this, I really didn't want more opportunities for research. Besides David and my own research, there really weren't other collaborators that I would have gotten involved with, and the teaching load was getting to be a little tiresome. So I got myself a job at the University of Maryland in the College of Ag and Natural Resources. And that opened up an amazing variety of opportunities for me. I was involved in the AgStat programs across the country, and we wound up writing a book together. This is some of the authors on the book, and met a huge variety of collaborators. The biometrics program was bedded in the Animal and Avian Science Department. This is Larry Douglas. I apologize, I couldn't find a picture of Larry Douglas, but he does love cows. So I thought, okay, he grew up on a farm with sheep and cows. I would put a picture of cows. He was one of the biometricians. Estelle Russett Cohen was the other biometrician, and then there was me. So there were three of us, and we were expected to collaborate with the scientists in the department, but also across the entire college and teach courses at the same time. One of the nice things was at this point I was teaching graduate classes. So I was no longer teaching the undergrads, I was teaching just the grads, and we had hired a lecturer to teach the big undergrad courses. But one of the scientists I started working with was Tom Miller, who was interested in sampling strategies for optimizing information in the Chesapeake Bay. So he introduced me to Margaret. Margaret was with the NOAA's Chesapeake Program Office, and she was interested in having me write a chapter on quantifying uncertainty in fisheries studies. So I did. I wrote the chapter, and she asked her husband, Jon Helge, if he would review the chapter. So that's how I met this person here, who we're going to see in about a month. He and Margaret are going to be in the Annapolis area. They lived in that area for a long time. They're still close friends. But Jon Helge introduced me to an entire new world. And I'll tell you more about that later. But I worked with Rosalina on chickens. I worked with John Walter on crabs. Larry and Estelle were colleagues that we all worked together. While I was there, we bought ourselves a house on the Eastern Shore. We were sort of looking forward to, would there come a time that we would like to retire? And if we did, where might we want to? And of course, I'm a water baby. I want it to be somewhere near water. And we found this house on the Eastern Shore outside of St. Michael's, north of Tillman, west of Easton, right here. This is the point of Kent. This is Poplar Island, a fake island. So we bought this house. My dad loved it, absolutely fell in love with it. He could sit on this dock and fish for hours. I mean, it must have been a Zen experience. He didn't have a book. He didn't listen to music. He just sat on the dock and fished. I didn't. So I never joined him on it. But these were the sort of critters that were just in our backyard, you might say. Buffleheads. In August, you didn't want to go swimming because the sea nettles would get you. Cow-nose rays, the first time we saw them, we thought, what the heck? Because there were just these two fins sticking up out of the water. And we're like, well, those two animals are really hanging out close together and moving perfectly. Well, it turned out it was the cow-nose rays going after the clams in the mud and soil, sand that was there. And then, of course, in winter, the Canada geese. Oh, my goodness, they were noisy. New Year's Eve for 2000, my family was over, and we went out and banged pots and pans at midnight. That was our big celebration. And we set all the Canada geese off. Very noisy evening. And of course, one thing you wanted to pay attention to was the water snakes. They're non-venomous. They weren't going to bite. They didn't like you any more than you liked them. So, but you could see them swimming here. You just wait till they moved, and then you went swimming. So this was a wonderful place to live, but it was an hour and a half commute. I don't know what we were thinking. It was an hour and a half commute for each of us. So we wound up getting an apartment in Silver Spring where Bob lived 4 nights a week, and I spent 1 or 2 nights a week. Being an academician, I could set my schedule up so I only had to be in town 3 days a week, and I could work off-site the rest of the time, whereas he had to be in town. Now, one of the downsides of this was if you didn't leave by 5:10 a.m. every day, you added an additional 15 minutes to your drive easily. The other thing is that during the height of tourist season, it was a good half hour to get to Easton. So healthcare, food stores, uh, lumber, you know, hardware stores, everything. Uh, go to the theater. You had to go over to Easton. St. Michael's is a lovely little town, but it really is focused more on tourists and has, you know, fussy little food shops and things of that nature. But if you really wanted to do regular shopping, you had to go all the way over to Easton. So between the commuting and the difficulty of being literally out in the middle of nowhere, except for a good golf course, it was not sustainable for us. And that meant that I started looking for a job again. I tried to get a job over at the Naval Academy, but they wanted somebody who was more of a mathematician or a probabilist than a statistician. I tried to get a job down here in Oxford with NOAA, but they weren't hiring. Thought about going out on my own, but I was in the middle of nowhere. It would have been difficult. This particular house, if you wanted internet, you had to do dial-up. So I had to get a modem, you know, 5 cents a minute. If Bob wanted to use his BlackBerry on the weekends, he had to go down to the dock because that was the only place he could get a signal. So this gives you an idea of how out in the middle of nowhere it was. We didn't realize all that at the time. So I started looking around. Someone mentioned University of Florida had an opening, so I applied. It had its pluses and minuses. American University's grant proposals department not only helped you do the budgeting for your grant, they also helped you edit the actual write-up. That's how good they were. When I got to University of Maryland, we had our own budget office in the department. So they did all of that for us. And the grants people made sure that we had everything we needed and it was in the right form. They didn't do the editing anymore, but that was okay. I got to UF, I didn't realize it. It's so bureaucratic that it got to the point where if you didn't get your grant proposal in, they didn't help at all. If you didn't get your grant proposal into the grants office, they charged you $2,000. I mean, seriously. That's not what I call helpful. So at any rate, I fell for it. I'm thinking, I'm going to be back in a statistics department. I'm going to be able to collaborate with statisticians in addition to the non-statisticians. You know, statistics is motivated by non-statistical issues, sampling and experimental design and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, I mean, the collaborators really generated lots of research for me. But at the same time, I wanted the opportunity to work with other statisticians. That didn't happen. The IFIS unit, unfortunately, because we were consultants, were often looked down on as the applied people. So I lasted there 5 years, but I met an enormous variety of collaborators. Sanjay, who worked on trying to minimize nutrient runoff in ag fields, Bobby and Wendy, who worked on probiotics and other food supplements and how they would help. Karen Steidinger, who's the red tide organism, Karenia brevis, is named after her. She worked for Florida Fish and Wildlife, and we did a lot of work on trying to predict red tide outbreaks. Bill Lindbergh, who was working on Grag grouper. Ed Flips, who was working on algae in, is Bernstein here? No, I don't see him. He was working on algae in Indian River Lagoon. Mike Allen, who I taught courses with on fisheries statistics. I mean, there were lots of fun things to do outside of the department. But what happened was, after 5 years there, my dad got cancer. Very, very sad. And oddly, my mother, who had never blinked an eye raising 9 kids, couldn't handle it. so I wound up taking family leave and going down to Dunedin, Florida, where I spent 5 days a week coming home on the weekends um, to take care of him. He went into a slight remission after the first set of chemo and radiation, but then it came roaring back and he died the next year. But that gave me an opportunity that I had never realized I should have taken advantage of much sooner. You love your parents, but I didn't hang out with them. I mean, I was functionally the oldest of the 9 in the household because my older sister, by the way, Peggy Ann, is mentally, what they in those days called mentally retarded, and she lives in a house for mentally disabled up in New Jersey. So in many ways, I was functionally the first kid, and my feeling was get away from the family, not embed myself with everybody. So um, this was my opportunity to get to know my dad, which was really sad, but at the same time set me on yet another pivot in my life. It was because of him I said, you know what? I'm not going to waste my time anymore. I'm going to go do what I want to do. I had an enormous set of collaborators. I had David from American. I had Yun Helga and Tom Miller and John Walter from Maryland and others. They're the ones that come to mind first. Then I had all these people I was working here in Florida. I had never won it for research topics. And so as a consequence, I said, okay, the university is not supporting me. I'm just going to leave it and open my own company, which I did. So outside of marrying Bob, that was probably the best decision I ever made. So that's what I did. I started my own company. The very first job I got was the Deepwater Horizon spill. They were interested because I worked in fisheries. They were especially interested in the impact of the Horizon spill on abundance and distribution of commercially important or economic or environmentally important species of fish in the Gulf of Mexico. And so I wound up working with some scientists who were doing particle models where they were predicting, using the actual data that had been collected, they were predicting where the oil droplets were going 3-dimensionally and time. So it was a spatial temporal model that was quite complicated. And then overlaid on that was my part, which was the fisheries statistics part. So I got data, NOAA provided me data for 256 species, which we then proceeded to model 3-dimensionally over this whole region and through time to see if we could figure out what the impact of the oil spill was on their survival and distribution. So that got me started in my business because that was a huge project. It was 2 years and two hires, 2 people that I hired to work on it. But because I had all these collaborators, I was able to work on food supplements. I mean, look at this list of food supplements that I somehow got involved in helping to design the the experiments and then the data analysis. So we have probiotics, we got fiber, don't ask me whether these work or not. I just analyzed the data. They made the interpretations. I just made sure that as scientists, they didn't try to manipulate the data or set up hypotheses having looked at the data. I was trying to keep them on the straight and narrow. But I also got involved with Fish and Wildlife. This was a fun project trying to estimate the recovery of the bald eagles in Florida. And they did really well, by the way. So that was a fun experiment. And then there was the seagrass experiments were some more. These are just examples. This was a fun one. The NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the state of Florida and other states around the Gulf collected data on reef fish. And this is, all right, come on, there you go.
maturity. All of these factors can give us an understanding of how the fish population is currently and potentially what it looked like in the past or will look like in the future.
Sort of data they were collecting. They would throw down what's called a GoPro. It was a cage with chevron trap. It was a cage with food in it to attract fish to it with cameras, GoPros. What they wanted to know was, okay, how many of each species do you see? I couldn't even tell you what species these are. I used to know, but I don't anymore. What size distribution were they? Could you tell whether they were male or female? All this based on a half-hour videotape. They did all the hard work. I just had to figure out where to put the GoPros and how to connect that information across reefs. We looked at things like how far does a fish go? Since, I mean, this is the sort of thing, you can't just count the number of fish because it could be the same guy each time, you know, so you don't want to. All right. Pam, how do I get out of this? I'm hitting escape, but it's not working. Oh. Oh no, I don't want to stop. I don't want to stop sharing. Oh, wait, no, I got it. I got it. Oh, I got it. Never mind. All right, give me that back.
As the name implies, they rely.
I can close it. Now I'm back. Sorry, guys. That's my mistake. I should have remembered that. But that was the sort of fun stuff that I got to do. I got to go to different places around the Gulf and talk to people about those kind of data that they were collecting. But I also got the chance to go to Costa Rica to work on the effect of the pelagic longline, which is used for capturing blue tuna, right? Bluefin tuna. And then a lot of work on fisheries, shark fisheries in the Gulf of Mexico. So these are just examples. But remember, I mentioned that Ewan was pivotal. Ewan Helge was pivotal. Because of Ewan, he invited me to teach a course with him. I'll stick it over here. To teach a course with him in Copenhagen. As a result, I met an enormous variety of fisheries scientists who desperately needed a statistician to work with them on their data analysis. So as a consequence, look at all these places I got to go. I mean, it was just wonderful, absolutely wonderful opportunity. And so over the years, after the Deepwater Horizon, because of Jon Helge, I got to meet all these people and hang out in all these different places and do research. So, and teach more courses. So that was a lot of fun. But I must tell you about the trip to Tromsø, this spot way up there. I was invited to Tromsø for a week-long workshop on recreational fisheries. Now, Norway's interesting. They have no licenses for recreational fisheries. They do no data collection. They don't know who takes what when, whether they're from Norway or from all the other countries around Norway, like Sweden and Germany and Denmark. And so as a consequence, we held this workshop to see if we could figure out how to actually find out how much fish and what kind of fish were taken out of the waters in Norway. The problem with Norway is this coastline. Check this out. You know, it's not, you can't set up a nice little simple grid and tell a boat to go out there and collect data, because he could be in the middle of an island if you do that. That's not a good idea. So we spent the week working on trying to figure out how to go about doing this. And in the end, Jon Helge and I came up with the actual technique, which I'm not going to get into, you don't care. So, but Norwegians know how to play. So here we are, midweek, they decide to take us fishing. After all, I mean, we're talking about recreational fisheries, we ought to go out, right? So they take us out. We're collecting cod and saithe and mackerel, and they say, okay, we're going to set up two boats. One's going to be in the fjord, So it'll be nice and calm. And one will be out in the ocean where you can expect it to be a lot more bumpy. So I opt for remember I get seasick. I opt for the fjord one. This is an example. They took all our fish and turned it in the most wonderful fish stew. So there we are all drinking beer and eating fish stew. And that was one of the highlights of the week. In addition to meeting all of these wonderful individuals here, they made us wear these Arctic suits in case we fell in. You know, it was always a good idea. I looked like the Michelin Man. So you don't see a picture of me. But this was the sort of things I got to do. I mean, these were opportunities that I never would have had if I had not taken some of those pivots that I never realized made such a difference in my life. So, the one final pivot, which was not a good one in some ways, was COVID, which we all were attacked with, I guess you could say. But as a consequence, all travel stopped, all work stopped in many ways. Any work that I did do was solely on Zoom, and even my employees, it was via Zoom, which just made it harder and harder to do anything well. So what happened was I had a lot of free time, so I started going back to my hobbies. As you can see, I like to, we sewed all our lives. I mean, I even one of my school uniforms my mother made me. She didn't buy it. She actually made it. I stood out, let's put it that way. Nicely. I was very, dapper. I got back into bread making again, didn't we all at that time? And also, we did so much hiking around the county that I started taking pictures and trying to figure out what all the flowers were. Don't ask me, I forget most of what I did, but it was fun to do. So, but then, since work was slowing down, I was still getting like 10, 12 offers of work a year, but it was time to move on. So I retired in 2021. And then ILR, Lynn Holt introduced me to ILR, which introduced me to Oak Hammock. See, I could have added you, Lynn, as another pivot. And that's how I wound up here. She introduced me to the ILR back in 2019. I got on the wait list, kept pushing our move here back and back and back. And then finally in 2024, Janice Hunsinger offered us this apartment, and we said, yeah, sure. So that's what we did and moved here in May of 2024. So that's how I ended up here. Thank you for listening to me. Oh, I'm sorry, by the way. I had no idea I went that long. You should have shut me up sooner.
Thank you so much, Mary. And now, if you have comments from the audience or questions. Jane and I will be around. Just put up your hand and we'll come to you if you'd like to say something to Mary or ask a question.
Here we go.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Jane.
Do you have an aquarium at home?
Oh, no, wouldn't that be a hoot if I did? No, I tend to kill things. I mean, we did have a cat. We were very classic. That little house, the little Cape Cod that we had in Arlington, Virginia. We had the veggie garden, we had the cat, but that was about the only thing besides the 3 plants we have that I could keep alive. I would have loved to have had a saltwater aquarium, but no, I'd have killed them all. I can tell you that.
So Mary, going back to your childhood, what was it like at dinner time with 9 kids and a couple of parents? How
Well,
did you manage that?
let's see. Dad would fall asleep with a spoon in his hand at the table. Mom would be yelling at us mostly, and the rest of us, it was boarding house reach. It was, whoever got to the food first. In fact, there was a point in my life, you saw how tall and skinny I was, and no fault of my parents. School actually sent me home with a letter that said, this child is undernourished, please feed her more. I mean, I was just tall and skinny. I wish I was still tall and skinny, but you can't have everything. So, at any rate, the answer is boarding house reach.
Anyone else? Yes, yes.
Um, so, having retired, but having spent a long career in statistics, what is your sense of where the field is headed in the future?
Oh, it is so past. I mean, I am an anachronism. I am a dinosaur for statistics today. I mean, my teachers were teaching us statistics that they learned that were no longer truly valid. I mean, they were still useful, like putting bounds on things, whereas nowadays you can just use a computer. But the field of statistics has changed mightily. I mean, my particular area, which was experimental design and sampling strategies, is still needed. There's still no doubt that it's needed. But most of statistics has moved towards data science, big data, analyzing the Google data, things like that. And the impact of AI, I expect. I haven't heard anything about that, but I expect that's one of the biggies too.
Hi.
Hey, Harv.
The Bureau of Statistics in the Labor Department is in the news lately.
I know.
And there's various stories that before the firing, the crisis, they were having trouble getting good statistics because of people not responding to surveys, lack of resources, so many different things. Do you have any opinions or have any offer us anything clarity that can we trust the statistics going to come out of the government in the future?
Well, the problem is I don't really know how the Bureau of Labor Statistics was collecting the data in the past. I mean, I was as shocked as anyone that they had predicted at one point 300,000 jobs, and the next month they lowered it to what, 40,000? I don't think they've ever done that in the past. So clearly there was some miscalculations going on. So to tell you the truth, I don't know enough about BLS or how they collect the data. But there has always been the problem of non-response and having to adjust for it. There are methodologies to adjust for it, but I can't tell you what they do. So no, I don't have an opinion.
I believe you mentioned that you were married for 40 some odd years, and both of you having very active careers. What's your secret to the longevity of your marriage?
It's an easy one. We argue a lot, and then at the end of the day say, I mean, we both like to argue. He likes to win more than I care, but sometimes, no, really, it's the communication, don't you think? The ability to communicate with each other is probably the most important thing, and agree on some other stuff. So thank you guys once again for putting up with me for so long.
Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you, people in the audience. Come on back next year, but give us some ideas. Thank you.